Well, good morning. This morning we're going to wrap up this series of lessons we've been doing all month. We have been talking about investing what we have into God's kingdom, investing who we are, what we are, our gifts, our talents, our money, our time. And so last of all, we come to this idea of what is it that we are investing as far as our influence is concerned. Online this week on Facebook, I posted the question, are you an influencer? You know, today everybody talks about influencers when it comes to social media. You know, it's one of those, whether it's President Biden or Trump or whoever it is that's running for office, they're trying to convince people that are influencers to help them out. You know, people that are influencers are those who are on social media who have a large following of people, and I mean, people just get on there. What did they eat today? How did they dress today? What are they thinking on this? What are they thinking on that? And so there's a lot of people who are on YouTube and other channels, and they're trying to build up their followers, and they're trying to become influencers. And so today the question is, are you an influencer? And you know, a lot of us would say, well, I'm not like that. No one wants to look at me. But the thing is, you are an influencer. Everywhere you go, every day you live, you are influencing somebody in some way by the things you do, the things you say, the things you eat, the people you associate with. And so everything we do is influencing someone in some way, either for good or for bad. And so every one of us today, if the question is asked, are you an influencer? Should say, yep, I'm an influencer. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but I'm an influencer. Now I want you to think about this. William Rigel records this. He said in 1930s, there was a little girl, and she went to school one day. And there was a teacher, and all of a sudden the teacher told this little girl named Mary, he said, Mary, you need to go to the bathroom, and you need to wash your hands, and you need to wash your face. Well, Mary wasn't used to these kind of things. She lived in a tenement house, and she wasn't used to taking a washcloth or soap and washing herself, but the teacher made her go to the bathroom, and so she went, and she was kind of hesitant. But as she went, she washed her face and washed her hands, and without saying anything, came back and sat at her desk. Now, I remember that when I was in kindergarten. I remember we had our own little bathroom in the classroom, and so the teacher would send you one by one. And so here's this little girl. She's disheveled. She's not got her hair brushed. She's dirty. And the teacher says, sweetie, I want you to go to the bathroom. She comes and sits at her desk, and he says that everything changed. When she came back, all of a sudden, the kids weren't focused on the teacher. They were focused on little Mary because, wow, she's pretty. So little Mary goes home, and all of a sudden she gets home, and her mom's coming, and all of a sudden her mom looks at this little girl and says, whoa, you're clean. I sent you to school, and you know, we didn't really think a whole lot about cleanliness. But all of a sudden she started calling the neighbors and the other apartments around her and said, come look at my daughter. And they came, and she was so excited because here's my daughter. And she told them, I sent her to school, and now look at what she looks like now that she's come home from school. And so the other parents were so impressed that they went home and got their kids, and they scrubbed them up, and they combed their hair. And all of a sudden, family by family that were friends with this lady, all of a sudden, he said, it didn't just change the one little girl and the way she thought of herself, but it began to change the whole apartment complex. And then it began to change the whole district as they realized that outer beauty could be unlocked and just how much a change it made in the little girl's appearance and her attitude. Now I think about this. I couldn't help choosing the songs this morning when I thought about this story. What a wonderful change in my heart has been wrought. When? Since Jesus came into my heart. You know, we think about this, how much change took place, you know, in certain times, in certain places, even today, cleanliness isn't a big thing. It's one of those, they run around, they get dirty, they just eat like they are, they go to bed, they get up, they go about their day, they go to bed, and it's over and over, and they're not really worried about washing themselves, cleaning themselves, washing the laundry on a regular basis. But what a change can be brought about just by one little thing, by one person influencing another person. How much change can God make in just one person, and that begin to influence another person, and the next thing you know, you've got the church. Think about it. When Jesus began his ministry, it started with two men coming and saying, hey, where are you going, Jesus? Well, come and see. Come follow me. Come see where I'm going. Spent so much time with him. It's late in the day. All right, we're just going to stay with Jesus. And then to go find Peter and to go find others. And you got to come meet this guy. Why? Because Jesus had an impact on their lives. You know, just a little bit of time with Jesus began to influence them. You know what? We don't know everything about this guy, but John told us he's the Lamb of God that's come. He's the one that's come to forgive us of our sins. We don't know what all that means yet, but we spent some time with him. And guys, y'all got to come meet this guy. Why? Because Jesus was influencing them. Just by his words, just by his life, just by saying, hey, come follow me. What? Think about this. In ancient times especially, when you had a great teacher, you didn't just come up to him and say, hey, can I be your student? There was a lot that went into becoming somebody's student. And yet Jesus says, no, come follow me. Come see what I'm about. I'll teach you. I'll train you. And you know, he grew in his influence over the days and the years leading up to the cross. Now this morning, as we think about this, what has he done to influence your life? You know, if Jesus has influenced your life in some way, then you need to invest your influence into other people so that they might come to know Jesus, so that they might see Jesus in you. You know, we talk about a lot of times the only Jesus somebody might see is your life. You being Jesus' hands, feet, mouth. You know, you're being the presence of Jesus' Spirit living in you so that other people can come to see what it means to have a changed life. And so as we go through this lesson this morning, it might be a little bit different, but I want you to think about this. How has God all throughout time used people of every variety to be influencers for his kingdom? And I want to start by going back to an Old Testament example, and I want to look at a woman in this particular case because sometimes God chooses to make an influencer out of those who just don't fit in. Have you ever felt like you don't fit in? You know? Yeah, we've all been there at some time, someplace. When I first came here, I didn't feel like I fit in. You know why? I came from the big city of Virginia Beach. I surfed, I skateboarded, I lived the beach type lifestyle. And so I came here. Now all of a sudden, man, I got to learn to fish, I got to learn to hunt, I got to learn about growing crops, and don't ask me to do it because every time I tried to grow anything, I'd kill it. But you know, it's this idea, man, what's the expression? We're not in Kansas anymore, Toto. You know, and so it was something I came and I had to learn. And now I fit in some, but I still sometimes feel like, man, I still don't fit in. But you know what? No matter what it is, how about at work? You know, sometimes you go to work and you don't quite fit in with everybody else because maybe you look different. Maybe your education's different. Maybe where you grew up's different. Maybe the way the people talk around you. You know, how many find yourself, the older we get, talking to these young kids that are starting to come in? I still call them young kids. Alex will be 22 tomorrow, and I still think of him as a kid. But, you know, we think about these young folk that are coming into the job place, and they talk different. They think different. And so even though you may have been there the longest, hang on, I all of a sudden feel kind of odd man out. Well, think about Esther. There's a whole book about a woman named Esther, and I want you to think about it. She was pretty much odd woman out. How about that? You know, she didn't quite fit in. She was out of place, definitely. You go to the Old Testament book of Esther, and the whole chapter really sets everything up. So we have to get this picture in our mind. All of a sudden, God has told the Jewish people again and again, I'm going to bring destruction. I'm going to bring people to take you into captivity if you don't quit sinning, if you don't turn into idols. And yet they kept doing it. He'd warn them, he'd warn them, he'd warn them, and finally said, all right, enough's enough. And so all of a sudden the Israelites have been taken into captivity. And so the Jewish people, some of them, the poorest, the oldest, were left in the promised land, but everybody else was taken to the foreign lands to be dispersed throughout the kingdom, if you will. And so we find ourselves with King Xerxes, and he's had this military loss, devastating naval defeat to the Greeks in 481. And as they return, he calls in all of the nobles, all of the governors, all of the princes, all the leaders of the military, and he has this huge celebration, this huge festival, kind of a morale builder, and try and fall back and regroup. But during this time of feasting and drinking, and it tells us there was just a tremendous amount of food and drink that just passed through the people over several days. And at the end of it, he says, you know what? Go tell my wife to come dance for us. And she is like, absolutely not. I know how much these people have eaten and drink. I'm not coming out and dancing in front of all these people. And so all of a sudden, the king has his higher-ups coming around and saying, oh, well, king, you got to do something about this. If you don't do something about this, all the wives are going to stand up against their husbands. And so on goes the greatest pageant of pageants. Who's going to be the queen? You know, you think about all the different reality shows, you know, the American Idol and The Voice and all these shows, you know, we want to find the best. Well, he says, I need a new queen, so we need to have a new beauty pageant. And so all of a sudden they start going out and finding all these young women who've never been married, and they bring them in and they begin to pamper them and to perfume them and to give them baths. And all of a sudden Esther gets wrapped up in all this. Now, think about it. Not only is she kind of feeling odd man out because, well, what if I don't want to marry this guy? But she's also odd woman out because she's a Jew and the rest of these people are probably from the Persian Empire to start with. So, you know, you think about even Middle Easterners today. You know, sometimes they look alike. You go from country to country, they're in that same region, they look alike. You know, you look at a lot of the European countries, you know, a lot of people still look alike. And so she was able to fit in that regard. She looked like everyone else. Well, if you've been there long enough, you've learned the language, you've learned the culture, you sound like you belong. But she still didn't belong. She was out of place. Well, how out of place do you think she was when she finally actually wins the beauty pageant? She spends the night with the king. He's so impressed with her, says, that's the one. Makes her the queen. Marries her. Now all of a sudden she's not only just out of place, now she's out of place because I wasn't born to royalty. How do I act? I'm now the queen. How do I relate to this man who's my husband? And what really begins to take place and change the whole flavor, if you will, of the book is that once she becomes queen, she finds out her cousin Mordecai, who helped raise her after she was orphaned, sends word to her, says, hey, your husband, the king, signed this edict into law that says that they're going to wipe out our entire people group. They're going to be given permission on a single day to kill as many Jews as they can, and it's going to be legal, and it's got your husband's authority. Esther, you need to do something about it. What kind of influence do I have? You know, that's kind of her first thought. What kind of influence do I have? They don't even know I'm a Jew. Not alone that. You know, yes, the king is my husband, but you don't just walk into the throne room. And so she has this conversation. She's feeling out of place. How can I influence anything? How can I influence anybody? Yes, I'm the queen, but I don't come to the king unless he calls for me. And she's probably thinking, well, I hate to lose my loved ones and my family, and this is terrible, but, you know, I think in the back of her head she's probably thinking too, but if I don't do anything, at least I'm the queen. I'll be all right. Mordecai says, you know what? You might make it for a little while, but then you're going to lose your life too. So it's up to you, sweetie. Do what you think is best. Well, here's where we see her influence. Esther 4, verses 15 to 17. Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go gather all the Jews to be found in Susa. This is the capital city where she is at. He says, go find all the Jews that you can find in Susa and hold a fast on my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. And I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. So she comes and gets word to her, says, hey, I raised you the best I can. You know God is with us. You know God is going to bless you if you are in this place at just the right time, at such a time as this. God has raised you up to be able to influence the king, to save your people. But you have to decide, am I an influencer or not? Am I going to let God use my influence to help other people or not? And so she finally comes to the point, you know, she's scared, she's nervous. She says, look, I don't come to the king. People that go to the king unannounced and uncalled for, they get put to death. She knew this. And so that's why she says what she does. She says, I can't just go to the king. I don't care if he's my husband, because he's punishable by death unless he holds out the scepter and says, come. So, sometimes in the movies and the cartoons, she's out there pacing in front of the door, kind of looking in, and well, come on in, Esther, what you doing? We don't know exactly how it went down, but she says, I'm going to do something. I'm going to trust God. And I'm going to try the best that I can to be an influencer for God and for God's people. And so ultimately it worked out. She's called before her husband, the king, and she says, hey, I want to have a meal for you. And next thing you know, he's coming in the meal, and the one who influenced him to make this bill against the Jewish people in the first place, a man named Haman, now they're both coming to dinner. So she has the dinner prepared, and the king comes, and Haman comes, and he's all excited because, hey, the queen's having a meal, and she invited me. And they eat, and she loses her nerve. So she says, well, how about this? Y'all come back tomorrow, and we'll eat together again. Husband likes the idea. All right. Queen's going to have another meal for me. I'm going to eat with my wife. It's going to be good. Haman, you come on back. Okay. He goes home, tells everyone, man, this is great. I got to eat with the king and his wife. And so he's thinking everything's great. All of a sudden, they come back together the next day. Remember, they fasted, not eaten or drink for 3 days. They've had the meal. She lost her nerve, but they come back together. They have the meal. The meal's winding up, and all of a sudden, she's trying to get her nerve together, and she finally comes out, comes clean. He asks, what can I do for you? What can I give you? What can I do to make your life better? What is it that you desire? And she comes clean and says, my people are about to get wiped out. Can you imagine the king's face? Who's your people? What do you mean they're about to get wiped out? Well, I'm a Jew, and you signed a law that said that they can kill all the Jews, and this guy here, he's the one that convinced you that we were a problem in the first place. And so he's confused. We can get this idea. Maybe he's getting mad. He walks out, comes back in. All of a sudden, he sees Haman just kind of hanging on Esther, trying to convince her, to spare my life. Have your influence help me out. I'm sorry. But regardless, it led to Haman being hung. It led to her being able to bring her cousin Mordecai and say, this is my cousin, and he's the one that saved your life. Remember, he foiled the assassination plot. He's the one you just honored, and he's made the new, commander helper. He's given the signet ring, and says, well, what else can I do for you? Well, I know you can't get rid of the law because once the law was written, that was it. He says, but you can write another law. And so you can write another law and give your people freedom to defend themselves without repercussion. And so you keep on reading. All of a sudden, some of them decided they're going to go against the Jewish people, and they lost their lives. Other people said, no, we're siding with the Jewish people because they've helped us, and they were there for them. But it all started with this young lady who was out of place saying, I don't feel like I'm in place. I don't feel like this is my place. But if this is really where God has put me at this time, I'm going to just forget about feeling out of place, and I'm just going to do what God leads me to do. So y'all pray for me. I'm going to pray for me. And when God leads me to do this thing, I'm going to use my influence for His good if I can. So we think about the first story. I hate even calling it a story. Story has the idea it's fiction. It's made up. This isn't fiction. This is real life. But she uses her influence. And so when we feel out of place at work, when we feel out of place in community, we have to come and say, God, I don't feel like this is the right place for me, but Lord, if I'm here anyway, help me to see how I can influence people. Sometimes it's just by the way we look, and sometimes it's by the way we carry ourselves, sometimes it's by the way we talk. But the ultimate point is, he says, when you don't feel like you're in place, it's okay. God can have you right where He wants you. But you have to choose. I'm going to use whatever influence I have for His kingdom. Well, let's look at something else. God can use those that are conflicted, even as religious leaders, to be able to influence people. Now, I have to admit to you, there are times when we're in a series and I just have to take a one-off lesson and say, we're going to get back to this, but we're not going to proceed this week. And I've done that before. And the reason is I'll get to a passage and I think I know what it does. I think I know what I'm supposed to say. And I'll get to working on it and be like, I'm not quite sure this is what I'm supposed to think and say. There might be that kernel of doubt. Is this really what the Scripture is saying? Is this really how I'm supposed to apply? You know what? I can't wrap my head around it. We're going to go on to something else, and then we'll come back to it. I'm going to keep praying about it. And so, there are times when even as a preacher, I'm conflicted over something that's going on, and I have to pray about it and study about it and think about it and talk to others about it. And then I come back, and then we'll study it together. And we've done that, and we'll probably do it again. But the point is, there are times in our lives where we're conflicted about what God's Word says, how to apply it, how to live it out, and we just have to keep pushing forward. We might have to leave it there on the back burner and go on to something else and then come back to it, but we have to keep pressing forward. Well, again, Old Testament, New Testament. Old Testament, God raised up a prophet named Jeremiah. Now, Jeremiah actually has 2 books in the Old Testament that we have, Jeremiah and the book of Lamentations. Lamentations, he was crying a lot. He was the weeping prophet. He was lamenting because of the state of his people, the state of God's people. And the thing is, the more God sent him to the people, the more he had to preach against their ways and everything else, the more he had to tell them, hey, God's going to take you into captivity. This before Esther. But the more he kept on preaching and teaching, it's one of those, he gets to the point, he says, God, this is depressing. I don't want to keep telling people these things. Because it didn't just, he had to keep talking against his people saying, you've got to change or God's going to correct us. He's going to do terrible things. But it got to the point where the people didn't want to hear it. So he was humiliated. He was treated terrible. And so all along, he was kind of conflicted. Well, I want to do God's will, but at the same time, I don't want to have to keep bringing this message of condemnation all the time. Well, later on, he writes something that's important. As conflicted as he says, I'm going to do what you want me to do. The people have gone into exile, and he writes a letter to the Jewish people who are in exile. I want you to look at what he writes to them. He's trying to use his godly influence on them, even though they're not in the promised land. And he says, thus, Jeremiah 29:4, thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all the exiles whom I have sent into exile from Jerusalem and Babylon. Think about that. God says, I want you to tell the people that I'm the one that sent them there. Babylon didn't just come and destroy them and by their own grace and their own power and everything else. God says, no, I sent you there. I brought them against you, and it was to do what I told you I was going to do. So he says, start out by reminding them that. Notice what he says. He says, now while you're in exile, he says, build houses and live in them. Plant gardens and eat their produce. Take wives and have sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there and do not decrease. Now this is the next part. But seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile. And pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. But seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. So the first part, okay, that's pretty easy for Jeremiah to teach him. All right, he sends this letter. He says, look, it's terrible. You're in exile, but God has a word for you. Keep on keeping on. Keep on living by faith, keep on praying, keep on studying the Scriptures and letting those who teach you in the Promised Land continue to teach you while you're in exile. Keep on getting married and having kids and getting your kids married and let them have kids. It's perpetuating the command to Adam, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth. So he's telling them, hey, God gave us this command in the past, it's still the same today. Live for faith, live for God, but keep doing the same things. Plant your gardens, eat the food that God gives you from the garden. Have family relationships, grow, don't just kind of decrease in number. He says, no, you keep on growing, I'm going to bless your families. I'm going to bless your plants. I'm going to bless your lives. But what about that next part? Do you think that made him a little bit conflicted to write? Oh yeah, and God had another word for you. Bless those who bless you. Bless those who curse you. Pray to God on behalf of those who brought you into exile. Pray for God to bless them and grow their city and their kingdom. Do you really want to pray for your enemy? A lot of times we don't. We might want to pray, okay, I'll pray for him. God, destroy him. But he writes what? No, pray that God will bless them. Pray that God will influence them through you. And that's really what it comes down to. You're out of place. You're conflicted. You don't want to be there. You want to be back in the Promised Land. You want things the way they used to be. but you're not going to. So he says, where you are, famous phrase that I learned when I moved here, bloom where you're planted, right? So many people remember that expression from Miss Mouse, bloom where you're planted. And so here he's saying, bloom where you're planted. You don't want to be in exile, but God's got you there for a reason. He's judging your sin, but he can still bring something good. So be a blessing to the people around you. Pray for their good. And as they're benefiting and they see your life and the way you're praying for them and the way that you're blessing them, it's going to change relationships. So he says, keep pressing on even when it doesn't seem right. Even when you're conflicted about it, keep pressing on and do the right thing. You go to the New Testament, another religious leader that was kind of conflicted. This time it's an inner conflict. There was a man named Nicodemus. And you know, Nicodemus, we first see show up in the Scriptures. Jesus is going through his ministry. He's teaching, he's preaching, he's doing miracles, he's casting out demons. And here's this religious leader named Nicodemus, and he realizes there is something different, something unique, something special about Jesus. He can't quite figure Jesus out or his message or anything else. He knows what his buddies, the other religious leaders, are saying. He knows how the everyday people are coming to Jesus in just multitudes. But he also understands, as influential as I am as a religious leader, I'm still conflicted. So what's he do? Well, John 3:2 says, this man came to Jesus by night and said to him, Rabbi, we know you are a teacher come from God, for no one can do these signs that you do unless God is with him. So he couldn't come out day by day to Jesus and say, all right, I'm going to just sit and listen. Because if he did that, then some of the other religious leaders would start questioning his loyalties. Well, are you with us or are you with him? So it says he chooses by night to go find Jesus, to meet with Jesus, to have a conversation with Jesus. And so the rest of John chapter 3, we see this back and forth conversation between Jesus and Nicodemus. Jesus knows what's on the man's heart. He knows that he's not just trying to butter Jesus up. He understands that he honestly means what he says. You are a man of God. I can't deny that, because if you're not, you couldn't do these things. But you see, Jesus knew the man's real heart, and the question wasn't just about, who are you? It's about, well, what do I need to be doing? How do I need to understand what you're doing? How do I need to understand what I'm supposed to be doing and saying to those who are under my leadership? And so Jesus just real quick flips the script and he says, you need to be born again. Whoa, what? What do you mean I need to be born again? Can a man enter back into his mother's womb and be born again? That's what the Scripture says. He's got this, he's trying to grapple with this. Hang on, I came to talk to you to figure things out, and you're telling me I need to be born again. How is that even possible? And Jesus teaches him. He says, no. Here it is. Unless you're born of the water and of the Spirit, you cannot be part of God's kingdom. Water and Spirit. What are you talking about? Well, I know John was baptizing people, but he told us that the Messiah was coming and he would baptize with water in his... light bulb. But then Jesus keeps going. A lot of times we can quote John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life. King James Version. But the point is, we often think about that verse, but that's in the middle of this conversation. He starts out by saying, hey, you need to be born again of water and the Spirit. You need to understand I'm here and I'm going to be lifted up. I am here to give my life for you and everyone else, that whoever would accept me by faith would have everlasting life. And he goes back and forth. Now, remember, Nicodemus is an influencer. He's a religious leader. He's a teacher of the Word. But he's conflicted. Well, what do I tell people about you? And now he's even more conflicted, because you keep reading. You don't find Nicodemus again until we get all the way to John chapter 7. A lot of ministry takes place in between these two times. So he leaves. He's got something to think about, but he's not quite convinced to come out of the shadows yet. But he's still pressing forward. He's still thinking of Jesus. He's still thinking in good terms. In John chapter 7, all of a sudden, we're at the Feast of Booths. Jesus is there. It's a week-long festival. He comes and he begins sharing that he is the one that God has brought into this world. His word is from the Father. It's not his own word. You get to the last day of the celebration, and he says, come to me, all who are thirsty, and I will give you to drink. He's saying, I'm the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy. This whole celebration is pointing forward to the time when I would come and I will give you something to drink. Not a cup of water, not just pouring out water for you to drink like Moses struck the rock and water came out and the people had water to drink in the past. He says, I'm here to fill you spiritually. And the religious leaders, you read John chapter 7, they get all upset. They send soldiers to go arrest Jesus. The soldiers get there and they're being influenced. They're like, no, you don't understand. You weren't there. You didn't see the way the crowds were responding to him. You didn't hear what he had to say. They're not willing to arrest Jesus, and yet the religious leaders are so upset about this. Notice who comes to Jesus' defense. John chapter 7, verse 50 to 52. Nicodemus, who had gone to him before, and was one of them, one of the religious leaders, said to them, does our law judge a man without first giving him a hearing and learning what he does? They replied, are you from Galilee too? Search and see that no prophet arises from Galilee. So again, he's among his own. He's among the religious leaders, but all of a sudden he's still conflicted because, you know what? I don't think we need to arrest Jesus. I don't think he's done anything that deserves death. Y'all need to just back down, back off, give him a chance. And so this is why he responds the way he does. Doesn't our law say you're innocent until proven guilty? Don't we let him come and explain himself and everything before we just skip straight from we don't like him to we're going to kill him? And so it's Nicodemus who comes to the defense. So now he's coming out of the shadows and he's coming a little bit closer to influencing people. And he says, I'm going to at least influence these guys away from killing Jesus today. Hey, back off. Even though it meant people were looking at him and saying, are you one of his now? Are you from Galilee? Do you search the scriptures and see anywhere where the Messiah is going to come from Galilee? But they back off for the moment. The next time we see Nicodemus, he is coming into full contact with the ministry of Jesus. Now, I say the full ministry of Jesus. I can't say the full life and ministry of Jesus because at this point, Jesus has been killed on a cross. He's hanging there. And now what do we do with the body of Jesus? Well, we pick up in John 19, verse 38 to 39, and we see that closest association that he comes to. It says, after these things, after the crucifixion, after the guard is there and says, well, is he dead? Is he not? Pulls the spear out and blood and water flowed. He is dead. After these things took place, Joseph of Arimathea, who was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly for fear of the Jews, asked Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus, and Pilate gave him permission. So he came and took away his body. Notice who's with him. Nicodemus also, who earlier had come to Jesus by night, came bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds in weight. So he comes at night because he's scared of what his influence might be diminished if they know he's openly associating with Jesus and talking to Jesus and trying to figure things out. We go further into the ministry. He's willing to say, hey, you guys might want to listen to what he has to say and just kind of hold your horses on committing anything further towards him. Now that he's dead, he doesn't feel there's anything else he can do, but he says, you know what? I don't care who knows. I'm putting my lot with Jesus. I'm putting my lot with Joseph of Arimathea. I'm going with him to Pilate and say, hey, we're going to take care of the body of Jesus if you'll just give us permission. Pilate says, y'all go do what you want. So they take the body of Jesus. He brings all of these different things that were used to prepare a body to be buried. He says, I wasn't brave enough to be an influence in his life, but I'm going to do what I can in death. We can only imagine what happened after Jesus rose from the grave and how it impacted Nicodemus. And maybe he was part of that 120 that was with the apostles on the day of Pentecost, praying and fasting and becoming that foundation of the church. But the point is, he was conflicted, but yet he kept pressing on. Are there times when you just don't know about the Christian life? You know, there's times when we just don't know where it is God's leading us, how God's trying to use us, but you got to just press on. Trusting, all right, I'm going to pray about it. I'm going to keep studying. I'm going to talk to other Christians. I'm going to say, God, what do you want from me? And we press on. because that influence might help somebody else who's struggling. You know, they could give up, they could go either way, but if they're looking to you and they see that you press on, well, maybe I'll press on a little bit further too. Maybe just one more day. Maybe just one more week. And who knows what God's going to use. But he says you need to be that influence even when you're struggling with your faith. Because when you struggle and you're authentic about it, but you don't give up. Look, I don't get it, but I'm going to pray about it. I don't get it. I'm still going to go to worship with my brothers and sisters. I don't get it, but I'm still going to keep pressing. I can hold to what I do know, what I do understand. He says, even when you're conflicted, press forward because you can be an influence on somebody else to hold on, even when their life's shaky. And the last thing I want to look at, and this is going to be a lot quicker, but God can use the influence of those who are new to faith. When we get to June, I'm thinking ahead of a series, and we're going to do lessons on the aged. All right? But the first lesson that I'm thinking about relates to this. How many were so on fire when you first became a Christian? You know, when you first were willing to come and confess Jesus before people, when you were baptized and you came out and everyone's hugging you, welcome to the family of God. Welcome to the kingdom, brother, sister. And we're excited. Wow, this is exciting. This is great. I want to tell everybody. But what happens the older we get in our faith, the more aged the church gets from the time it was planted? So that's where we're going in June, Lord willing. But for this morning, just think about this. How much influence does God just really want from those who are new to faith? And again, think about it. These are people that are outside the norm. These are people that the religious leaders and the religious people, they really didn't want a whole lot to do with. But think about how Jesus called two different tax collectors to come follow him. Again, these are guys out of the mainstream of religion. They worked for the enemy. They padded their pockets a lot of times. And so people didn't like them. They, think about a modern-day IRS agent. IRS agent comes to your door, and you open the door, and they say, I'm from the IRS. What do you want to do? Thump. Let me shut that door real quick like. I don't want anything to do with you. I don't care why you're here. All right, well, Matthew, a.k.a. Levi, and Zacchaeus were the same boat. They were both tax collectors. But look at what happens when they were influenced by Jesus. Matthew, a.k.a. Levi, he's first at a tax booth when Jesus walks by and he says, hey, come follow me. Here's the crazy thing. Matthew's like, okay. He shuts up the tax booth and he follows Jesus. Why? Because he's already been in some way, shape, or form influenced by the things that Jesus was doing. The kind of people that Jesus was attracting to himself. And so when Jesus came and he said, hey, come follow me. He said, okay. He must have been really frustrated with his job that day. That's all I could think. But there was something about the power of Jesus that when he called you, that there's something that stirred in you. So he's influencing Matthew. Matthew 9, Mark 2, Luke 5, they all three talk about the conversion of Matthew. But here's what happened. He says, you know what? If I'm going to follow Jesus, I'm going to influence everyone I can. So the next thing you know, you read that Jesus is calling him. He leaves the tax booth. And then he says, hey, I got an idea. Jesus, come eat with me. And guess who he called to have the meal? Hey, I got a lot of tax collector buddies. I think that they could benefit from a guy like you. And so it says that he has this meal together, and he calls all his tax collector buddies and sinners. We can only imagine what kind of people that just included. But it says, there's tax collectors and there's sinners, the people that the tax collectors hung out with. All of a sudden, Matthew opens his house up. He's having this meal. Jesus is there. They're sitting, they're eating, they're drinking, they're talking. The people are listening. All of a sudden, there's the religious leaders, the religious, we're holier than thou, looking on, and they're asking the disciples, does Jesus know who he's with? If he's really the Christ, he'd know the kind of people he's with. These are tax collectors. These are sinners. What is Jesus doing with these kind of people? Well, he's using his influence on them that they will become the people of God. But you see, Matthew was so excited, all of a sudden, what do? Let's have a party. Let me call all my buddies together. Let me at least bring them into the presence of Jesus, and Jesus can do his thing. And you know what? It may influence them. Sometimes we just need to say, you know what? We're excited about Jesus, and I don't know how this is going to work, Roger Carr challenged us at the men's retreat this weekend. He said, you know what? Have somebody over to eat with you. Mike Terry, the preacher from Aiken, he was on a panel, and he said, here's what you do. You bless them. He says, you know what? You need to be attentive to the people around you, but then you need to eat together. There's something that takes place over eating. It's not going to take place in this room. There's something that comes together when you have that relaxed atmosphere of food and drink and laughing and just sharing life together, that all of a sudden you can begin to influence people in a different way than you can in a group setting like this. So Matthew says, you know what? I know what I can do. I got a lot of buddies. I can influence them by having a meal. And Jesus, you do your thing. Think about Zacchaeus. You know, we're going to do this real quick. Zacchaeus, you know, the song tells us Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. He climbed up in the sycamore tree for the Lord he wanted to see. And as the Savior passed that way, he looked up in the tree and he says, Zacchaeus, you come down, for I'm going to your house today. You know, such a simple little song that I remember learning as a child that tells us the story of Zacchaeus. But you know, the Bible goes much deeper. You know, he's heard about Jesus. He's being influenced by the things, again, just like Matthew, that he's hearing, that he's seeing. But he's not been able to see Jesus face to face. He's not been able to see the ministry. So he says, all right, I know Jesus is coming into town. I'm going to drop everything I'm doing. I know he's got to come down this road. So he goes into that road, and he goes up into the tree, and he's just waiting. You know, I think about the parades. You know, this past St. Patrick's Day, I thought it was crazy. I didn't know this happened year after year. They were doing a news spot on Channel 6 News, and all of a sudden they went to Savannah. And it was crazy early in the morning, because I guess there's a time frame when all of a sudden, if you want a spot on the parade route, you can come early and you can get you a place and you can set up a tent and you can be there, so when the parade comes by, you're ready. Zacchaeus says, I know the parade route. I know where Jesus is coming, and I know where he's going, and he's got to come past this spot. So he gets up in the tree because he is a short guy. God bless you if you're shorter. But you know, here he is. He's shorter. He climbs up in the tree, and he just wants to get a glimpse of Jesus. He just wants to see what the big deal is. How do you think Zacchaeus felt as a tax collector, as a Jew who's not even accepted by his own people, really? He's sitting there in the tree watching. Jesus comes, and he just kind of stops. Now again, here's where you have to use your sanctified imagination. But I see Jesus coming up the tree, and he just kind of stops, and Zacchaeus is like, oh, no, what's going on? Why'd he stop? People are probably thinking, okay, Jesus, what's going on? What's special about this spot? And he looks up, and everybody else looks up. What's he looking at? Oh, it's him. Can you just imagine the crowd's response? It's him. What's he doing here? Why is Jesus stopping to even give this guy the time of day? Can you imagine their response when he goes further to say, Zacchaeus, come on down, brother. Brother? Jesus, what are you talking about, brother? He's a tax collector. Zacchaeus, come on down. Zacchaeus gets down on the ground. Jesus says, hey, let's go to your house. I'm hungry. Let's go eat. And everyone's like, Jesus, what are you doing? Hey, I'm going to his house. I'm going to go eat. Y'all want to come? No. But why is this so important? Look at what Zacchaeus says. Luke 19, verse 8. And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. People are still, what in the world? See, this man knows something. He knows salvation is coming to his house today. He's heard about me, and now he's experienced me, and now he's ready to start influence other people for me. Just that quick. Why? Because a change had been made in his life as Jesus was coming into his house, as Jesus was coming into his life. We sang, what a wonderful change in my life has been wrought since Jesus came into my heart. He's odd man out. He feels out of place in this moment. He's kind of conflicted. Well, do I make a profession of faith? Do I do something right here in front of everybody else? And before he can think anything else, he says, Lord, I know what they're thinking about me. You're coming to my house. I want to do something amazing. I'm going to give half my wealth away today. That kind of makes news even today. You see some of these rich people and they're getting older and what am I going to do with all this wealth? I'm going to give it away. Whoa. But what's kind of sad is a lot of times people aren't so excited about, yeah, he's giving it away. What do they get excited about? Well, maybe it's coming to me. How do I get in on this? But he says, look, I've got money, but it really means nothing if I don't have friends, if I don't have relationships, if I'm not serving God with it. So all of a sudden, he's influenced by Jesus simply coming to his house. And he says, Jesus, I'm going to give half of my money to the poor. Flat, period. But then he goes above and beyond this. And one of the things that I questioned when I was younger is, how in the world did he know who he had defrauded? He said, if I've defrauded anyone, I will give 4 times whatever I took that I shouldn't have taken from him. One of the things we know about tax collectors, they kept good records. They kept records because they had to know what they had to give to Rome. And then they also knew what they'd taken above and beyond. They had records of what had come in. Rome didn't care. As long as Rome got their money, they didn't really care. He says, look, if I go back through the records and find that I've taken more from someone than I should have because I've got the names of the people in this community, I know what I've taken from people, I'm going to not just give them back what I took that I shouldn't, I'm going to give them 4 times more. So he's already half broke, and now he says, I'm going to give even more. Why? Because Jesus touched his life. How many people did he in turn influence and touch their life? Think about it. If you've got $100,000 in the bank account and you just decide, I'm going to give $50,000 away this week to people that are poor, how much is that going to touch people's lives in this next week? Even if you just get $100, well, whoo-hoo, I can go get some food. I might can go pay a phone bill. I might can get electricity extended a little bit longer. He says, I'm going to be an influence for you. Why? Because he was excited about this. He was excited because Jesus was coming into his life. He was coming to his house. Are you an influencer? You are. The question is, are we influencing people the way these did? When you feel out of place, do you say, I'm just going to shut up because I feel out of place, I'm not going to say anything? Or are you going to go to lunch and, you know what, I don't know what else to do, but I'm going to just sit here and quietly pray over my food? That's an influence. Some people might come up to you. I know I've done it before. If I've seen someone praying with their family, there's times I've come up, thanks for praying for your family. Go on out of the restaurant. Somebody might say, man, people really do that still? That's kind of weird. Okay, but at least somebody's thinking about it again. We think about the different moments we have in our lives. When we're conflicted and people know we're struggling. All right, but are you going to press on or not? People are looking. People are watching. And when we press on, it makes a difference. We need to get back to that faith that we had when we first came to hear Jesus. We first came to profess our faith in Jesus. And we need to grow beyond that. He talks about how there are times when we have that childlike faith, but it needs to grow, it needs to mature. That means we need to not only be excited like we were, but that excitement and that influence needs to grow. So that's what we're seeing. What do we do with our time? What do we do with our money? What do we do with the gifts God's given us? What do we do with the influence that we can have on people one day at a time? And so in all of this, God's Word tells us, invest what you have. Invest who you are so that God's kingdom can grow. And so that may be in your house. It may be with the kids, the grandkids, the great-grandkids. It might be with uncles and aunts. It might be with mom and dad. It might be with people we work with. It might be with people who live around us. We never know who it is. It can be the people we work and go to church with. There's a lot of people in this congregation that have influenced me in different ways in the time that I've been here. Hopefully I've been an influence in some way for y'all too. But the point is, he says, we have influence that we can use or we can abuse. We can either use it to grow God's kingdom or we can use it to destroy it. Or to try, because we're not going to destroy what God's built. But we can try to use it in a way to destroy it. And unfortunately, at times we go back and forth, don't we? But his comments are simple this. What have you done to be able to influence someone else? What are you willing to do to influence someone else in a time that you've got? The cool thing about God is God continues to say, hey, come confess your sin, and I'm willing to forgive your sin. Hey, you've gotten off track, that's fine. Come on back, and I'll restore you. Prodigal son, he went as far as you can. Dad, forget it. I don't want you in my life. You're dead to me. Give me what's coming to me. He goes and he wastes it all, and then he's thinking, now what do I do? I'll go eat the pig slop. Nope, I'm not doing that. And you know what? I'm going to go confess my sin to my father. At least maybe he'll hire me as a servant. And he gets back, and I love the picture. Father's looking. The father's waiting. He sees the son coming. He doesn't wait for the son to get to him. What's he do? He runs. He runs to the son while he's still way down the driveway. And he wraps him up in a hug, and he kisses him. And his son tells him everything he's done. He's willing to confess. He said, Dad, I don't deserve to come back, but I just want you to take me back like a servant. And he says, no, you're my son. Get some clothes. Dress the boy right. Get the ring. Put it on his finger. Go kill the fattened calf. It's time to celebrate because he was dead and now he's alive. He was gone. Now he's back. Isn't that a great picture when we think about the love of God for us? He loves us so much that no matter what we have done, we're none so far from God that we can't come back to him and have him say, I love you. Come on back in. Let me embrace you. Let me bless you. Let me use you to influence others. And so this morning the question is, are we out there wandering? Do we need to come back? Have we accepted him as our Lord and Savior to start with? He says, you know what? There's no time like the present. Because we don't know how much time we have in this life. I don't say that to scare people because I hate when people just make, I'm just scared, so I'm going to give my life to Christ, because that doesn't last. But if you realize how God has blessed you and used you, he says, then come. And I'll take you and I'll use you. This morning I'm going to ask Mr. Vernon to come back.